Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we feature top entrepreneurs, business leaders, and thought leaders and ask them how they built key relationships to get where they are today. Now, let's get started with the show.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I am the host of this show. And if you are new to this program, go check out some of our past interviews. We've got all kinds of interesting interviews in the archives with smart CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs of companies ranging from, we had Quicken a few weeks ago. We got Netflix, we got Kinko's, YPO, EO, Activation, Blizzard, many more. And I'm also the co-founder of Rise 25, where we help connect B2B business owners to their ideal prospects. And my guest here today is Corey Kupfer. He is a deal-driven growth strategist, negotiator, dealmaker, speaker, and like me, an attorney entrepreneur. We got to stick together, us attorney entrepreneurs. There aren't many of us. He's also founder of DealQuest, which is the host of the weekly DealQuest podcast and author of Authentic Negotiating. He's been an entrepreneur from the age of 15, and I'm going to ask him all about his entrepreneurial endeavors when he was a teenager, because I know I was not organized enough to be making money when I was 15 years old. He's also a passionate advocate and leader in the entrepreneurial world, been involved in EO, Entrepreneurs Organization, which I'm involved in as well, and a renowned strategist on deal-driven growth strategies. And of course, this episode brought to you by my company, Rise 25, where we help B2B businesses get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with done-for-you podcasts and content marketing. Go to our website at rise25.com to learn more about it. All right, Corey, pleasure to have you here today. You know, we connected through the entrepreneurial world, and we were chatting beforehand about at 15 years old, you were savvy enough to go drop in on businesses and to have a little side hustle where you convinced them that you would go around passing out flyers, which was pre-internet days. So, you know, people were doing that sort of thing. Some of it's still today, but it was definitely a thing back then. But what I love about it, which I think is most impactful, is that you hired your friends to do the deliveries, which so often it takes a long time, maybe a lifetime, to realize that you don't have to be the one who's doing the actual deliveries. You can get the client. So did you realize that at a young age, or is that something that kind of came after a few years of doing it?
No, it's funny, John, and I appreciate you having me here. It's like I didn't, I think, actively think about it like then, like, should I do it myself or should I, whatever. I guess part of it was that the model, the business model, right, and the flyer delivery business was that the company would hire an older kid who would drive, and then younger kids like me, 14, 15 years old, whatever it was, who he would the older kid would drop off, and they would deliver the flyers, and he would drive around and make sure that they were actually delivering them, putting them in the doorways of the fence, whatever it was, as opposed to throwing them in the garbage or down the sewer, right? So the model was to have a crew, and it just took that to get it out there. So maybe I wasn't as conscious. But the funny thing is that I am such a delegator. I've had no problem with it all of my life. Like, I didn't have a tough journey around that. So maybe it was somewhat innate back then, because I had a bunch of my friends working for me, and I didn't drive back then, so I had to ride around on my bicycle to check up on them.
And were you raised around this? Were your parents entrepreneurs? Did you have it in the family?
No, this is the strange thing. Like, my parents worked for somebody their entire life. My dad's big advice in business, and my dad was definitely a mentor, and he became successful in business. But when I was growing up, I grew up in a low middle class family. We weren't poor. We had food on the table.
And you were in Brooklyn.
That was about it. We didn't take vacations. Yeah, in Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. We didn't take vacations. We didn't, go out to eat. We didn't, it was a big deal when my mother went back to work and we could afford to go to the Catskill Mountains, for one weekend in the summer. My dad was always like, the way you make it is that you become as indispensable as possible to your boss in the company. As they move up, you move up, but always remember, nobody's indispensable. Right. So that was his thing to me, which is great advice. I remember I had one uncle, it was sort of a strange when I was younger. So it was only like later when I was a teenager, right, that I met the uncle was an entrepreneur. So I don't know where it came from. Like, there's no history other than the fact that I just was naturally a hustler.
It looks like you took that lesson about being indispensable to your boss and you kind of internalized it and applied it to work with clients, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. And I think, I don't know, I was always somebody who worked, I always wanted money. Like, again, I didn't come from a family where my parents had a lot of money to give me. So, I was sort of driven to want to be able to whatever, buy my sneakers or buy whatever it was that I wanted back then. And I had done prior to when I was 15, the usual kind of snow shoveling and lawn mowing and whatever. And I guess when I saw this flyer delivery business, I saw a bigger opportunity. And I don't know what had me have the confidence or the chutzpah or the nerve to think as a 15-year-old kid, I can walk into the local retail store or candy store or whatever, and say, hey, we can deliver you flyers. But I don't know. I did, and it worked.
And you got to the point where you're making $300 a week. This is 1976, $300 a week, $1,200 a month. I mean, that's like $14,000, $15,000 a year, which in those dollars and for a kid is just an insane amount of money.
Oh, it was ridiculous. I mean, it was so much money. And I did that, the only thing that I look back on and I realized I didn't understand back then was I did that for a couple of years, age 17, I went away to college. So, I did it 15, 16, and then 17, I got away to college and I just left the business. What I didn't understand back then was enterprise value. I didn't understand that I should have been, I could have sold that.
Sold it to someone else. Yeah.
I had a revenue stream, but I didn't have that concept back then. So when I went away to college, I just left it. And then I did other things in college. I was like Claire Rose was the band distributor out there and they only dealt with one representative on each side of campus at Stony Brook. So for my last 2 years, anybody who wanted beer delivered for their parties on campus at Stony Brook, and folks, think back, this is a time when 18 was the drinking age in New York, not 21. They had to go through me. So I had all these other hustles in college, but I left that business behind and in hindsight left some money on the table.
And what inspired you to want to go to law school?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Despite the fact that I had this entrepreneurial thing going on, right? I did come from a very typical sort of low middle class, upwardly mobile Jewish, and it's not exclusive to Jewish, but I happen to come from a Jewish background. Family who, put big emphasis on education. My dad had graduated high school and gone into the Army. And he only got a college degree 12 or 14 years later, going at night when frankly, he had moved up in a company to a point where it didn't matter anymore, but he wanted it. My mom was a homemaker at home until my younger brother was in school. And then she went back to nursing school. So, it was that very typical next generation. Now kids are going to do better than we are, stress on education. So it was I think back and I met other kids since then who took a year off backpacking in Europe or was a ski bum or whatever, or that wasn't even on the menu for me. I hadn't gotten on a plane since my entire childhood until I was in law school. So it was just sort of like high school, college. And then, I was in a special law, politics and community affairs program at Tilden High School in Brooklyn that got me interested in the law. Now, I do nothing of the law that we did back then. We would do trials and criminal stuff but it got me interested. We visited jails, we did all this crazy stuff. So I sort of went into college knowing I wanted to go to law school and, just did the thing, went to law school, got a job, high school, college, law school job. That was the sort of route. That was, I don't know, there was only one thing on the menu for me and my family.
Yeah. I'm asked sometimes if I would do it again, if I would go back to law school and, so much has changed in the law. I usually say, yeah, I probably would, because going to law school teaches you that how the world works, or rather that you can figure out how it works. What are your thoughts on that, especially today, given what we know now with the changes in the practice of law?
Yeah, a couple of things. I think first year of law school does a very good job at honing your critical thinking, abilities, right? And I think that serves people. I know so many people who went to law school who aren't practicing, and they're entrepreneurs, they're business executives in other areas. They move to stuff, and I think those skills really do help. And frankly, listen, I had a point in my career when I left big firm and medium-sized New York City practice where I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur and open a business. I was just deciding whether it would be a law firm or something else, right?
Yeah.
I ended up, for various reasons, I could tell a story going in a legal route, but yeah, I think especially first year law school, because that's where they hone that Socratic method and the way of thinking and analyzing stuff, and it's pretty rigorous and disciplined. I think that's useful in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And interesting to your career, you started firms a couple of different times in your career. The first time was 1992. The second time, I believe, was 2005 time period. And then again in 2015. What's the difference between what it was like starting a law firm back then and today, in today's terms?
Well, first of all, in 92, I had no clients, right? So, when
were you right out of
New York
school
City,
then, or a couple of years out of school at that point?
I was 6 years out of school.
Okay.
But, when you work at New York City firms, big New York City firms, there's this interesting dichotomy where they don't encourage you, smaller firms will, but when you get that plum job, right? Partners just want you available to them, right? So not only do they not encourage you, but they discourage you from trying to develop your own business, thinking that it's not going to be big enough clients and they don't want you distracted. They want you available to them. Then when it comes time to make partner, they say, well, you're not going to make partner without a book of business, right? No, I didn't even get to that point because I knew I didn't want to stay to make partner. I looked at the lives of partners in big New York City law firms and I was like, wait, that's what I'm aspiring to? Like to work even more and make more money that I don't have time to spend? No, I'm not interested. But but for me, so that was one thing. So in 92, I had no clients. So I was really starting from nothing. I mean, I went to every networking event out there. And of course, back then it was pre-internet. How did you meet clients? The only way that you really met them was you went out and literally handed out business cards and
Chamber of Commerce events, stuff like that, mixers.
So it was that kind of hustle, right? I got on the New York State United Teachers Union, had like a legal plan where if you got on the panel, they would send you clients and it was like $50 an hour. And then, and it went like up to $65 an hour. And all my friends at the big firms were like, why, we're billing $175 an hour. Why are you working at 65? And I would be like, well, the menu is not 175 versus 65. The menu right now is 0 versus 65, right? So, so work my way up. I mean, everything was different back then. You needed servers, you needed, it was pre-internet, I'd be going to Staples to buy my own supplies. I mean, you name it. In fact, this is funny. I remember there was a place down on Wall Street, which is now, it became your Wall Street office. It was called Service Resource Industry back then. And it was pre-Regis. It was pre-WeWork. It was pre all those shared spaces. And this guy, Steve, who ended up becoming a client of mine, had this concept for this sort of shared office space. And also, this was the key thing. He had a brand new technology back then, which was that if somebody called in your telephone number, it would come in on a computer screen in front of a receptionist, and it would say Law Office of Corey Kupfer, and they could transfer that call to me and my studio apartment on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, because that's where I was. Okay. And that was newfangled technology back then. The fact that you could actually so I could appear like I was in an office.
Yeah.
Right. And that was brand new back then.
This is 92?
92.
Wow.
92.
Yeah. That's very.
So that's the way I started, right? And built it up from nothing and got clients and built it up over time. Ended up adding a partner a couple of years later, who I joke was the only, guy, because he was a litigator and I was doing a little bit of everything when I got out, and I only had a corporate background. So I would call him up and say, I'm going to court for the first time. I waved to the judge, like, where do I stand? What do I do? I have no idea what I'm doing. So he would help me out. And then he ended up coming in and because I joked he was the other one stupid enough to leave a big firm to become my partner. And he joined, and then we added a third partner. We built that firm up, to a pretty nice thing until 2001 when we split. Just differences of opinion and various things.
Pre-9/11?
So this is interesting, right?
Yeah. Because a lot of business, obviously tailed off after 9/11.
So what happened was in late, I think it was 2010, one of my partners left to open his own firm, and my other partner and I, who actually, had some issues back then, we ended up splitting up in March of 11. So that was before 9/11, obviously. But a lot of people don't realize the economy wasn't great even before 9/11. Like, it was starting to get shaky.
Yeah.
As, by the way, the economy was horrible in 92 when I started my firm. Everybody told me I was crazy because I voluntarily left a job that was about to move me over 6 figures, which back then was huge money.
Yeah.
Still decent money now for some people. But, and I made $17,000 net my first year, and $38,000 my second year, and $78,000 my third year. And by the fourth year, I was making more money. So in any case, comes to 2001, the economy's a little shaky, partnerships splitting up. and I sort of relaunched, my own firm again, with an assistant and a part-time associate. And that was that relaunch. And then, again, in 2015, I merged my firm in 2010 in a partnership that we ended up splitting up in 2015.
Yeah. And how hard was it each time those partnerships broke up? Was that a major setback? Was it, you seem like a relationship guy, so you put a lot of effort in the relationships. A lot of times I always say that when a business breaks up, the person who controls the relationship controls the business, because the clients are going to go with the person who has the relationship.
Well, so, it was interesting, and each time it was different. In the one in 2001, the economy was tough. And then obviously 9/11 hit, not long after that. My office is down on Wall Street. We're actually out of our office for weeks. So, that was tough. But I did a few smart things back then. I cut expenses significantly. I reacted very well then. I actually rented off. So we actually, myself and my ex-partner continued to share an office for 4 more years until the lease was up. But we ran 2 firms out of it. And I had a phenomenal corner office with a view of Statue of Liberty, big office with a couch and the whole thing. And I said to myself, you know what? I don't know how things are going to go. So I actually sublet that office out to somebody and moved into a smaller office, which, was interesting from an ego point of view, right? I had a corner office but it turned out to be a great move because, through the 9/11 time and the tough economy, my nut was a lot lower. And, I was able to build and rebuild, much less so because of the split, because, I had my client relationships, like you said, but because of the economy and also the headache and disruption, it is a distraction, right? And come back, a lot stronger. The partnership split up in 2015 was interestingly different. I mean, the thing is, by then, and even on the first one, I knew I started this thing from nothing. I had no clients, right? So when you do that,
you can do it again.
Yeah, I mean, you start from nothing. You can start from way beyond nothing, later on, right? The interesting thing in the 2015 split was that there was a particular niche. We do a lot in financial services with like investment advisors, and we help them leave like Merrill Lynch, Morgan Stanley, UBS, all the big firms, and become entrepreneurs and set up their own independent advisory firm. And my ex-partner had a reputation in that space, and I had done some stuff in that space, but got into it a lot more when we were partners. So I had a question that time about in that particular space, where things would go. Fortunately, I ended up doing very, very well out of it, and we've grown exponentially since then. But each time it's a restart, it's a disruption. You got to figure it out. But I think that's where the entrepreneurial spirit comes in. Like, again, when
some people love that,
from nothing.
Some people, that's their favorite time, right? It's like starting something over, creating something, deciding the logo on the business cards, all that kind of fun stuff.
Yeah, and it does. In a way, it's re-energizing, right? It's. One of the issues that us entrepreneurs have is that we when things are going too well for too long, we get bored, right?
Yeah, or self-sabotage, right?
Yeah. So it's easy to self-sabotage and blow stuff up. I've learned, I think I've learned over time where what I've done instead now is that I've, first of all, I keep building a great team, which is crucial throughout the entire thing. But I've also just taken on other challenges, right? I started a speaking, training, and consulting company. I wrote a book. I launched the podcast.
Keeps
as
it
opposed
fresh
to
and new.
Blowing up the stuff that's working, I just can't add new challenges now. It's a much better way to go.
So speaking of challenges, so one of your firms started in 2005, 2006 time period. And back then, it required a lot more capital investment. You had to build out offices. It wasn't the virtual stuff that a lot of people do these days. And then going into 2008, 2009, that whole financial downturn, you still had a loan on that you were paying off, and you actually had to sleep on your air mattress in your office. So talk about that and what that was like after 20 years of practicing.
Yeah, I mean, it was amazing. I mean, I was 25 years in. Like I said, I had shared that split up with the partner. I shared the office through 2005, and then we built out our own office after that lease was up down on Wall Street. And we built out this amazing office. Williamsburg, Brooklyn had become very, very hot, and I had moved there. And there was somebody who actually ran the building that I moved into that had office space there as well, and said you should start an office there, there because Brooklyn's hot, and we have some business for you on the real estate side, the deal side on that side. So I was like, great. So we built out an office, and we had $30,000-$40,000 in computer wiring and servers, and literally we had to run wires through the walls before we closed them up, right? Because that's how there was no internet, there was no wireless, there was no, none of that, wireless. So in any case, I had taken out a loan, and then for that, and then the Great Recession hit, and I thought, I said that I reacted well in the initial time when 2001, when I cut stuff back, but here I was a little overextended. Also, like most people, I had no idea the depth of this thing, and I didn't react quickly, right? I had a great team. I didn't want to get rid of them. Next thing I know, my revenue is down 30, 40, 50, 60 grand a month, right? Mm-hmm. When you start going, that much a month, the money goes quick, especially when your expenses stay up. So I was slow to react. Eventually did have to lay off a couple of people, had this office lease, and ended up in a position where I was like, okay, I've got to pay for my payroll for the people who left. I got to pay my rent. I've got a house up on Lake Joseph in the Catskill Mountains, which I have a mortgage on, and that's not worth what the mortgage is right now. And something's got to give. And I had a rental apartment in Brooklyn, and we gave it up, and literally had an air mattress in my office. Fortunately, we had a shower in the office. And I would, for a couple of months, sleep on the air mattress, get up really early before my employees come in, pack it up, shower. I had creditors calling me. I was just looking at that stage of my career. I never thought I'd be at that point, and it was really a soul searching, tough time. So many of my friends and business advisors told me to declare bankruptcy or short sale the house up in the country. Half the debt was corporate, could have gotten rid of it. I ended up about $330,000 in debt, no money in the bank, and, plus having a house that I remember, one of the things that I had a friend, actually one of my Entrepreneurs Organization forum mates at the time, it was this small group we have in EO where we get together monthly, support each other to be successful. They called me up and said, "Hey, Corey, come play golf." And I was like, "I can't play golf, David. I can't, I'm right. I don't know where the next dollar is coming from. I'm like in the weeds." And I hung up on him. He said, "Come on, it'll do you good." I hung up on him and said, "No." And about an hour later, I called him back and said, "All right, let me go." I said, I got to get my head clear. And I went out, we played a round of golf. I literally, for the first time in like months, just tried to let go of everything and just have a nice day. I remember that was on a Thursday. Friday, I went into the office for half a day, just packed some stuff up and said, I need to get out of this environment. I went up to my place at the lake, which was financially underwater, but
pretty
a nice place to get it. Yeah, exactly. And I took the weekend. I did some visioning work, and I really looked at, hey, all right, this is a restart opportunity. What am I going to do with this? What's my vision? Am I comfortable declaring bankruptcy or short selling the house? And I came to the conclusion that for me, that didn't align with my inner truth. I always say that I don't judge other people who, the bankruptcy laws are there, they're legal. If somebody chooses to do that for them or their family, I have no judgment whatsoever. But just for me, I try to have everything in my life come from a place of getting in touch with my internal truth and my own character and what sits well with me. And that's how I try to operate in every relationship. How I handle my clients, my employees, all of it. And it just didn't align for me. So I made a decision then that I was going to pay back every penny. And I actually put together, there's a tool that I teach in my authentic negotiating book. And I actually give this example in it of something called a CPR, context, purpose, and results. And I can, give you more details on it. But the bottom line is I did this process that I would tell other people to do in negotiations. And what I was clear on was that I was going to be in communication with my creditors, because I knew people were like clients who owed me money were hiding on me, right? They were having tough times. People react differently under stress. I was going to call back every creditor. I was going to tell them what I could do. And I had conversations like, okay, I know you want $18,000 tomorrow, but I can send you $50 a week. And they'd be like, no, we're going to sue you. And then I just send them $50 a week, right? Because I figured out the amount of money that I could afford, and I divided it up percentage-wise by the creditors that I owed, and I just kept sending them money, and I kept returning their calls. You know what? The truth is, somebody who's doing that, when they got all these other people they're chasing who are hiding out for them, who are not, whatever, they may make a lot of noise, but, they saw that I was serious. And then as things came back and I did better, I'd up the amounts. And within 4 years, I'd paid off the $330,000. I had also put another couple $100,000 in my own retirement account, in that time. And most importantly, out of all of it was not that I just avoided bankruptcy or not, whatever, is that my relationships and my reputation were not only intact, but if anything, enhanced, right? Because of the way I chose to handle it, right? Because everybody
not digging your head in the sand. Yeah.
I didn't, right. I showed up. I was honest with folks. And so, and we fortunately from that base, built something that's way beyond what we had, back at that time. And now I have more pots of money for emergencies, and
So I'm curious because back around that time period, 2008, 2009, I was working at a law firm, and it was a real estate law firm. Most of our clients were way underwater on lots of different properties. And it's a total natural reaction for people to stick their head in the sand, not want to deal. They can't deal. There's a lot of emotion tied up in it. How do you convince someone that's in the throes of something like that, that the better thing to do is to not put your head in the sand and to deal with it on a day-to-day basis, week-to-week basis, like you described?
Well, I mean, I'll say a few things on that. One of the biggest things I talk about in my negotiating training and the Authentic Negotiating book is that emotion is the worst thing. Emotion can be a signal to you, but if you let emotion drive your approach to anything, you're negotiating with creditors or your decision-making, you're in trouble, right? If you're coming from, I talk about the biggest reasons why negotiations fail, and they're all, they're fear and ego and desperation and scarcity and, all that kind of stuff, rigidity. So, the ability to step back and, and come, get connected to that truth, right? Because, and I say to people, now what's easier for me is I share my personal experience, right? Because one of the biggest ways you can get through to somebody when they're in a similar situation is to be able to share a personal experience where you've been through that journey and you made that. At least they say it's not just a theory. It's like, oh, somebody actually did this and applied it, right? So, I've always, I guess, I don't say always, but I have, fortunately, most of the time in my career, taken the long view, right? Not done the expedient short thing. And for me, my word, my character makes a difference. So, I'll ask people about that in a non-judgmental way. Again, listen, sometimes if you can't feed your kids and, whatever, just make that decision from a very grounded internal place, not from some reaction, or fear. Try to make sure you can live with that decision, ongoingly, including if you're a parent and I wasn't, but, what kind of example you want to set for your kids and whatever. And again, I don't say that in a judgmental way. I just say, you got to get to your own truth. And I talk about that even in just business negotiations, right? Like we're very, as human beings, we're much less inclined to do that deep internal work. And for me, the world's manifests from within, I believe. I believe we create our reality. And I believe that we don't control all the external circumstances, but we certainly control our relationship to them. And I guess maybe because I came from the background I came from and have spent a lot of times with highly financially successful people and seen that not all of them, some of them are very happy and well-adjusted and some of them are really miserable, right? So for me, I've come to understand that, it's really that internal alignment and being in character, and in integrity for you, not some external moral, but for you, that makes life work. So that's what I encourage people, to do. And wherever they end up out of that, again, if out of that they decide to declare bankruptcy, that's all good.
Yeah, right. when you started your firm in 2015, it was a very different world. By that point, I say that when I started my firm 2011, I had just come from a firm where the founder of that firm had spent 10 grand to buy some server that went in a closet and it was antiquated technology. 2 years later, I spent $10 a month for Dropbox for all my files, and they're cloud hosted, all that kind of stuff. So it was a very different world. So talk a little bit about your approach to starting a business in 2015 and building more of a virtual operation, keeping your costs down, all that kind of stuff.
Well, here's an interesting little story. So I won't say names, but I had told my partner at the time that I had merged in 2010. I was unmerging in 2015 for a number of reasons in terms of different vision, values, et cetera. And I had told him that, we were leaving as of a certain date. And he, for an attempted competitive advantage, actually locked us out of the office like a week or so early, right? Mm-hmm. So we actually, like, the last thing we were going to do was set up the tech. I had, my buddy was a tech guy, was not going to take it out or whatever. So we really had to, scramble, right? Mm. And literally in a conference room in my buddy's, he's actually one of my EO mates' offices. He had our tech set up in like an hour, right, on a few laptop computers and some cloud programs, and we were up and running, right? Mm-hmm. There's no way that would have been possible, in 1992 when I started, or even in 2001 when I split up my first partnership. So yeah, I mean, it's so much easier now. And then we started that way, and I was planning on getting a place in California, and I looked at whether I want, office space and whatever, which traditionally I was totally necessary in my business. But I had this real sense that the world had changed already. And this is 2015. I'm not talking pandemic. And I actually had my assistant do an analysis on my calendar for the last 3 years to say, how often did I meet with a client in my office? And the answer was what I suspected, almost never. Mm-hmm. Like nobody, even in 15, people were, video calls were already around, conference calls. Maybe, sometimes you go to their place or out to dinner, even if you met. So, and I said, you know what, I'm going to get a place in California. I'm not necessarily going to be here. I don't need to have my employees have to be in the office. And we sort of went full circle. Like when I first started, I started in one of these shared spaces where you could have a virtual office. And, we signed up with a place where we have conference room access, in Westchester and in New York City, and we have an address, and we don't. But unlike in the beginning, we don't use any of their phone service or whatever. My team does that, and we've been operating virtually since May of 2015. At the time, we weren't hiding it, but we weren't also super promoting it. We were just operating, right? And what's interesting is the pandemic hits, and we have to make no changes whatsoever. We don't miss a beat. And we continue to operate the way. And now, of course, a lot of people have come around to like, why do I have all this office space? Like, what am I paying for?
Yeah, exactly. Right. I can imagine lots of law firms have got lots of downtown real estate in cities all around the United States, and they're kind of wondering how they're going to fill it now that people want to work from home.
No question. And listen, there's a problem. I mean, you had raised to me a little bit in our pre-discussion, like this entrepreneurial mindset and lawyer mindset thing. And my guess is I've seen it. Some of the law firms are going to, moving back because just their culture and their mentality is very different. And they very stayed in their ways. I have a lot of thoughts on why most lawyers aren't entrepreneurial, but it's going to be interesting to see how that comes about, because I think some of the firms have maybe figured out they can do it differently, and others are sort of retrenching back to their usual model.
Let's talk about that entrepreneurial mindset versus lawyer mindset, because I've done it. I've seen that is transition from practicing law, embraced the entrepreneurial mindset. Certainly ups and downs and all that kind of stuff. But a lot of lawyers struggle with it, and a lot of lawyers are miserable. And I've talked to so many lawyers who are like, "Oh, tell me how to do it," and I'll say to them, I could, but you're not going to do it because so many of them aren't willing to do it, or they don't have what it takes. So what do you think it is?
Yeah, so I think it's a few things. I mean, first of all, let's start with the premise, even outside of lawyers, right? That most people are not natural entrepreneurs, right? I think you got three categories of people, and I have no judgment on any of them, right? You have people who are going to be employed for their entire life. My parents were with those people, right? You have people who are natural born entrepreneurs and could not breathe unless they had, their own thing, which is me, right? Even though I was in, like I did what I needed to do working with somebody, but I always sort of, and then you have situational entrepreneurs, right? People who, and I have some folks in my EO forum like that, they were in a particular business, something came up in their company, they had some client relationships, they sort of went out, and none of them is better than the other. But the point is this, that first of all, you've only got a certain small percentage of people, period, who are entrepreneurs. Now let's layer in the law firm thing, right? Most lawyers, think about the way we're trained, right? You went to law school. And I say this to my business clients all the time. And frankly, I think it's one of my biggest competitive advantages is in law school, all you learn about is things that go wrong. Because you learn about cases, right? Yeah. There's no cases of the deals that worked out, of the business partnerships that worked out, right? Yeah. There's nothing to study there in terms of the cases, at least the way law school's taught, right? You taught all legal theories based upon cases. So one thing for me is that I believe, you need to take risks to be an entrepreneur. That is an issue that a lot of people have generally. Then you got lawyers who are trained only to focus on risk, right? And in fact, most lawyers are over-indexed on risk, and that not only makes them less likely to be an entrepreneur, but it also is what drives business people and entrepreneurs crazy about working with them, because when they're working on their deals and their contracts and negotiations and whatever, yes, identifying risk, understanding risk, doing your best to mitigate risk is a very, very important part of what we do as lawyers, but it's not the only part, right? The ability to recognize the business opportunity and help a client take advantage of that and balance that appropriately with the risk profile, right, is really where it makes a difference. And that's where a lot of our colleagues, in the law fall down. So I think that same mentality that has them frustrate the heck out of business people is also a big part about why they don't often become entrepreneurs. And even if they start their own firm, most lawyers are self-employed. They're not entrepreneurs, right? Yeah. So I remember when I was thinking about going on my own, I looked at the big firm partners. And I'm like, I don't want that because they just work their butts off and make more money than they can spend. But then I looked at the alternative, which was more often like some solo practitioner, right, who still had a hump at age 70 because if they didn't work, they didn't make money, right? And I'm like, I don't want that either, right? So, I think over-index on risk, not being risk takers is one thing. The other thing is, and listen, I've had this not prevent me from being an entrepreneur, but it's actually talked me out of certain like investment deals, like real estate deals and stuff. We're also so taught to have that analytical thinking that we can be prone to overanalyze things. And the thing about being an entrepreneur is there's some element of jumping off the cliff and making your wings on the way down, right? You can't figure out everything up front. And we're trained to be able to try to figure it all out, right? And I think that definitely works against, lawyers, as well. And I think a lot of times the personality of folks who go into law to start with, there are exceptions like us, but a lot of them just even personality wise, right? Even if they weren't lawyers, they'd be something else where they'd be not, entrepreneurs. So I think there's a number of those factors. People often ask me whether I work with entrepreneurs, I work with lawyers, and I don't because they're tough. Like I actually love working with my financial advisors who I help become entrepreneurs when they leave Morgan Stanley and Merrill Lynch, GBS. But they, and listen, there are people who will never leave Mother Merrill, right? Again, no judgment. That's where they belong. They're made to be an employee. But I think in some of these other professions, they have more of the skills. One other example I'll say. How many lawyers resist? If you ever said that they need to sell, right? Like how many lawyers that would be like, it's why we call it rainmaking and business development and all these terms.
Kind of derogatory.
We never want to see ourselves as salespeople, right? But great selling is relationship building anyway in any business, right? So I think that's the other piece is that lawyers are the culture is so, trained to have a negative around, having to sell yourself. And you know what? When you run your own business, whether you're a lawyer or any other kind of entrepreneur, if you can't sell yourself or, convince someone else to sell you, right? And I say it in those terms because it's sure. I could say I build relationships, I do business development, I do authority marketing, I do all this stuff, whatever. I'm selling me, me and my team and the, services we provide or the product. I don't have a widget to sell.
From now on, if I meet a lawyer who's thinking about going out on their own, I'm going to refer them to this interview. I'm going to say, listen to this answer, because that was so well articulated, explaining all the challenges, particularly for lawyers. But so you joined EO, you've been in EO for like 15 years now. Talk a little bit about the impact that being a part of that community has had for you.
Yeah, it's been amazing. It's funny because I joined EO in 2008. For several years before that, I was around the community. I knew a lot of EOers, right? And I would show up as people would bring me as a guest to events. And then so back in 2000, I'm thinking it's probably 6, 7, in the early days, EO was less formalized legally, and a lot of the chapters weren't even operating as an entity, whatever. So they started to get their act together. And I actually got referred in to do the legal work to form the New York chapter as a real nonprofit entity, right?
Yeah.
And then so I got to know the board members and all these people. And at some point,
they recruited you.
What's that?
And then they recruited you to join.
Well, yeah, but they had been recruiting me for like a while, right?
Yeah.
And again, I didn't get EO in the beginning. Right? I'm like, no, I got all these other commitments. I'm on this board. I do this. I do that. I don't need another thing, right? I didn't really get it, right? And then at some point, they just looked at me and said, "Come on, Corey, you've been to so many events as a guest. We gave it a legal order. Just join the damn thing." So I did, and I never looked back, because I found out that EO is not, like anything else that I've ever been involved in. To be in a peer-to-peer learning situation with other entrepreneurs who think like me, I always say to folks, "Listen, yes, we have great speakers, and I do all these cool retreats. And yes, I did take a helicopter ride to Base Camp Everest, and, and I could tell you a million stories like that. And yes, that's all amazing and worth it. And I would do it for that and the international community. But what it comes down to for me is like, where else can you be? EO is entrepreneurs only, right? There are other organizations that do similar stuff, but they're not only entrepreneurs. And where can you be in a place with your peers where they've been, they get you, right? They get the way you think. They get that entrepreneurial mindset, that visionary, that that desire to build stuff, and they've been through some of the challenges that you're going through, and this peer-to-peer learning, this sharing, this ability to share experiences, and just find your people is invaluable. And I can tell a million stories on specific things that how EO has helped me, and the great connections I've made, and the great experiences I've had. But yeah, I mean, it's been phenomenal.
That's great. Corey, I know we're really long on time, so I'll wrap things up with my last question. This is my gratitude question. I'm a big fan of gratitude, especially expressing gratitude, not just to family, friends, team members, but also peers, contemporaries who are out there. Who would you want to thank?
I mean, listen, I'll stay on theme, because my EO forum, some of these guys I've been with for 12, 13 years. And then the other ones have been at least 5, 6 years. And when you are in a great, so for the listeners that don't know EO, there's a small group that some of us have, benefit of being in a forum. You meet usually monthly, you go on a couple of retreats, and really they're there to support you to become successful, not only in business, but, in life and family and health and community and the whole thing. And I happen to be in a forum with guys who would do anything for me and me for them. Right. And they've been through the toughest times, with me. And we've been through, people going through divorces and financial struggles, and, there's nothing we hold back. So, those guys in my forum are invaluable in my life.
Excellent. Corey, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Where can people go to learn more about you? Check out the podcast, check out the book, all that kind of stuff.
So the best hub is CoreyKupfer.com, CoreyKupfer.com. That will lead you, to the book, the podcast. It'll click through to the Kupfer Law website as well. So that's the hub.
DealQuest Podcast and Authentic Negotiating. If you want to Google either of those, I'm sure you can find them that way. Corey, thank you so much.
Great being with you, John. Enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.